And let's welcome Rainer Polak. It's my pleasure to introduce Rainer, who's also a colleague here in Frankfurt, a senior scientist at the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics. And he'll take us back to Mali. Again, we talked about Mali earlier, and the title of your talk is Growing into Music and Dance in Mali. Rainer, the stage is yours, please.
Thank you. So let me start by sharing my screen. Okay. Here we go. Yeah, thank you, Daniela, for introducing me. This is a talk about social learning. And while I've done some empirical musicology and cross-cultural music cognition over the past 15 years, were enhanced a lot by collaboration with wonderful colleagues such as Nori. My academic socialization is in social anthropology, and this is the perspective I would like to be taking on in this talk, which means that I try to understand social learning as a social practice itself, or perhaps being embedded in social practices. The first one of two perspectives, which I would like to contrast within this vast concept of social learning, is instructed learning or teaching, a position which is well represented in the cognitive and educational sciences. This position also is prominent in the field of music cognition, of course, for instance, in the widespread usage of a variable such as years of musical training as a measure of musical experience. And indeed, in the field of evolutionary anthropology, it is assumed that in addition to implicit social learning by observation and imitation, instructed learning or teaching is quintessential for the transmission of human cultural traditions. The second perspective on social learning, which I would like to contrast here, emphasizes learning processes that occur without the learner's awareness, based mainly on the exposure of an individual to statistical regularities in her environment. This is addressed as implicit learning or implicit statistical learning and stands in contrast to instructed learning, of course, in more than one respects. Obviously, the character of teaching as intentionally instructive behavior contrasts with the lack of this intention in implicit social learning. In addition, the concept of teaching assumes teachers or the older generation have a high level of agency, while acquiring knowledge or skills through implicit learning assumes learners have most of the agency. Not least, generic abstract knowledge is assumed as the result of teaching, whereas the concept of implicit learning assumes context-specific knowledge as its outcome. Now, in the field of music cognition, there is increasing evidence of implicit statistical learning playing strong roles in the acquisition of both basic and complex features. This also suggests that implicit learning may represent the cognitive process, which is largely responsible for the developmental process of musical enculturation. Now, in the modern West or global North, with its heavy institutional emphasis on formal schooling, it is, of course, crucial to consider how explicit teaching and implicit learning interact. However, from an anthropological perspective, it is not sufficient to study the global North in our search for understanding humankind. One body of work which I suggest is relevant to consider here is the huge mass of ethnographic literature on how children acquire skills across cultures. And this literature has been digested in several excellent surveys by David Lancy, who is a leading figure in the anthropology of childhood. And these surveys give a very clear message, namely that from a culturally and historically comparative perspective, implicit learning is universal, whereas explicit teaching, of course, exists, but is very rare. Another theoretical concept, which I would like to list here under the label of anthropological perspectives, and which has a good deal of overlap with implicit statistical learning, is situated learning. One relevant field of study here is cultural developmental psychology, where Barbara Rogoff, on the basis of cross-cultural comparative fieldwork, has elaborated the concepts of guided participation and learning by observing and pitching in. According to Rogoff, children learners in indigenous cultures show an intrinsic motivation to collaborate and contribute. They are capable of sustained attentive observation, and they are inclined to imitate and participate in their elders' core occupations, if only they have the chance to be present and observe. The prototypical role of adults in indigenous learning cultures, according to Rogoff, is not teaching. Rather, it is to provide opportunities for children to be present and participate in a community's core social, cultural, and economic activities. To take a small example here from Mali, social anthropologist Barbara Polak has shown Rogoff's concepts to be productive in understanding how young peasants from infancy through childhood to adolescence develop increasingly complex and reliable farming skills in southern Mali. By being present and observing their parents and older siblings working in the fields, playing with old outworn but still sharp-bladed hoes as toy tools, and being charged with increasingly demanding work steps, which the adults try to keep in line with the children's developmentally increasing skills. A second relevant concept of situated learning, similar to Rogoff's, has been elaborated by anthropologist Lave in her studies of traditional apprenticeship systems. Lave emphasizes that in many cultural contexts, novices in communities of economic practice usually work their way from more peripheral to more central roles of action, but during the course of this development are already accepted as legitimate, if peripheral, participants. Now let me present some qualitative data from my ethnographic work on music and dance performance in southern Mali. I here focus on a case study based on 3 field trips since 2018, which however make part of my longitudinal work in the area since the 1990s. The case study concerns performance practice in Gergely, of which you saw a photo before in Nori's talk, a rural peasant community where people frequently organize public performances for playful public entertainment, which integrate percussion music with song and dance, often on the occasion of wedding celebrations. The spatial setting of these performances is an embodied amphitheater consisting of a ring of spectators and musicians who literally frame the situation and create a clear space to the interior, a performance arena that serves as the dance floor. Access to dance performance, which is the lead performance role in this context, is not limited to specialists. Everyone present at the gathering is invited and even socially obliged to participate from time to time. This is coordinated by regulations of turn-taking in dance and role switching from spectator to dance performer and back. The percussion music is open access, what concerns hand clapping and rattle playing, but restricted to male specialists in the case of the drumming. A key finding of my many years of participant observation and interviews in Gergely is that there is no tuition, demonstration, or rehearsal activities for either drumming or dancing. Neither in school, where neither music nor dance make part of the curriculum, nor in associations, families, or anywhere else. There is nothing but the public performance itself and self-organized children games where the kids playfully imitate the public performances. In conversations and interviews with experienced dancers and drummers in the village, people emphasize that both learning to dance and learning to drum depends on one's own motivation and relies on observing performances and then pitching in to the same performances by imitating the contributions of other dancers. For example, in an interview with villager Fatmata Kante, who fancies dancing quite a lot, I asked her how she would go about if she wanted to acquire a certain dance step. Her response was, quote, "You have to take a position in the ring of spectators from which you can observe the performer's dance step. Then you move along with whatever the dancer is doing. You do the same thing. And when you feel good, you go out on the dance floor and try it yourself." And Namagan Keita, who is a peasant but also serves as the djembe drummer in Gergely and the surrounding villages, once told me in an informal conversation, quote, "I started drumming when I was still very small, when I was about 3 years old, with a toy drum. At that time, it was common for your mother to buy a little toy djembe drum for you, so that we could play with it while she could go about her own work in peace. Certainly, there was a djembe master here in Sagele, but he didn't teach me. In what follows, I describe some aspects of how the process of learning to dance through observation and imitation is embedded within the actual performance context. At public celebrations, children and youth usually fill the ranks in the spectator ring, as you can see here. While standing at the sidelines of the performance arena, they tend to persist and attentively follow the events in the arena, as you can see in these photos. Here is a brief video example showing some children at the left side who, beyond watching, also try to clap or move along with the main pulse of the music. The following example features a girl at the sideline who tries to get into some specific dance step while at the same time carrying an infant on her back, which also is true of the adult dancer, the dance step of whom the child observes and tries to imitate. Speaking about behavior at the sidelines, children and youth quite often get excited and take some playful steps into the arena, but then stop, turn around, and return to the ring of spectators. This mostly does not amount to really taking the dance floor, but rather blurs and pushes the sideline of the performance arena inwards. From time to time, this then will provoke counteraction, which is to clear the floor by pushing the children back, resetting the separation of audience from performance space. In the following example, the real performance, if you will, which is the encounter between drummers and individual solo dancers, is taking place in the right half of the image. While in the left, several members leave the audience ring, of which two adults seek and finally get to take the dance floor, one after the other, while some other persons somewhat chaotically cross the dance floor in other business, such as serving drinking water to some older attendants. Whereas some kids on the left side are playing the floor taking. They do so as if, until they are pushed back by an adult who is chasing them with a playful, alluding to whipping their feet. So please keep an eye on the left side of the ring. Sometimes children and youth do enter the actual arena and perform. Please have an eye on this girl in the violet dress, marked by the green rectangle, as she properly and beautifully performs a walking step. And a final example I would like to share with you is an 8-year-old girl who is taking the floor for a proper little solo dance, starting from the left side here. And I would like you to note that during her performance, she's attracting the attention of the lead drummer in the blue shirt here, who is switching focus from another dancer to the little one while with his drumming patterns, and plays a proper break after she went off again, which means to post hoc musically highlight her dance performance. However, such opportunities for children and youth to take the floor are constrained and relatively rare. The young, therefore, must be quite motivated, persistent, and patient while making their way from observer to performer over the years. And many of them indeed are motivated, persistent, and patient. To sum up, the opportunities of learning to dance are embedded in, but also constrained by, the interaction order of the performance. This is to say that the system of joint action whose social practice constitutes the learning content and goal of the learning process at stake at the same time also constitutes the learning context. So far for the findings of my case study. Now let me discuss some conclusions that might be drawn from this. Quite strikingly, I would say, the evidence I presented is consistent with the theories of situated social learning developed by Barbara Rogoff and Lave. In the case of learning to dance in Gergely, both the situational pitching in and its developmental trajectory from peripheral to central action roles are manifest even in a literal physical sense, namely from the ring of audience members to the performance arena, which is the dance floor. More generally, my findings suggest that situated social learning must be quite efficient in allowing relatively complex activity systems and multimodal communication to evolve. Now, you might think that we basically knew that before, especially from the study of first language acquisition, and whether we really need ethnographic case studies, such as the one I presented, to make the same point again for music and dance. My answer here would be that one thing at least we can learn from ethnography and from ethnography-based theories of learning, such as Rogoff's and Lave's, is the importance of the social situatedness or embeddedness of implicit statistical learning. Social learning is social not only insofar as individuals learn from other individuals, but that both learners and role models typically share being involved in a situation of shared focus, of attention and action goals. Be that vernacular work task, everyday conversation, ritualized ceremonies, or social entertainments, such as the celebratory music and dance performance we saw in rural southern Mali. In other words, while implicit learning is unintentional in terms of knowledge transfer, it does involve intentionality and what is more, shared intentionality with respect to the situations of joint action within which it is embedded. From this point of view, it appears misleading to conceive of implicit learning as incidental learning, which some cognitive science research tends to do, as if learners would stumble by accident into arbitrary pieces of information that for some reason they find lying around in their environments. By contrast, the theoretical emphasis suggested by situated learning, to some degree is guided or biased by the structure of the practices within which it is embedded, or by the tendency of the social environment to produce self-enhancing stimuli, if you will, which is, I would think, a typical aspect that distinguishes social environments from physical environments. A second point I find worthwhile discussing is that one may use case studies such as the one I presented to reconsider the analytical concepts and their definitions we use in our research, and which often is not congruent across disciplines and discourses. Take, for instance, the functionalist definition of teaching, which Michele Kline has proposed by expounding on Csibra and Gergely, namely to conceive of teaching as behavior which has evolved to facilitate learning in others. Under this super broad concept, Kline specifies a taxonomy of 5 subcategories of teaching, which include direct, active teaching, teaching by evaluative feedback, teaching by stimulus enhancement, teaching by opportunity provisioning, and teaching by social tolerance. Now, under this definition, my case study clearly would provide examples of teaching, as the performance interaction structure includes aspects of stimulus enhancement and opportunity provisioning. This then may be read as suggesting that the contrast between instructed versus implicit social learning, which I emphasized, is perhaps a false binary or straw figure. However, an alternative reading of the same incongruency of definitions would be that Kline's inclusion of opportunity provisioning and social tolerance overstretches the concept of teaching, and underestimates the actual differences between instructed and implicit forms of social learning. Okay, that's it from my side. But before opening the floor, let me acknowledge the essential role in my research played by my fieldwork assistant and co-author, Numoke Doumbia from Bamako, and a whole bunch of extremely generous research partners from Sagele and Bamako, who since the 1990s have offered me their time and knowledge and hospitality. So thank you. I here stop sharing my screen and hope for some interesting comments, questions.
Thank you, Rainer, for these insights and for bringing us like the videos and the spirit of Mali to our Social Bridges conference. We wait a little bit for questions to trickle in, but maybe I can ask a question right now. I'm wondering, you had this fantastic example with the little girl and the drummer in the blue shirt. Mm-hmm. Was the girl? Yeah, she entered the stage and then he had some reaction to her. I was wondering what role social reward and recognition plays in this situated learning. So is this happening more often that people the adults react to the children, and this is intrinsically rewarding? Is this talked about in the village, or is this are there any rewarding reward cues for the child?
Yeah, wonderful question. Thanks. There's even gestural patterns or mechanism of provisioning reward, I would say. Mm-hmm. For instance, often people are thrown a scarf during their own dance performance, and this is a gestural iconic sign of respect and appreciation, mm-hmm. somehow comparable to individual applause or spotlight. And dancers are very much aware that they are being spectated or watched and socially recognized by the community members, and this is one of the motivations for them mm-hmm. to perform. It's of course it's a fun thing, but at the same time it's a social performance of your own identity, which is rewarded, and this reward is even given by the community through direct feedback mechanisms mm-hmm. such as these gestures.
Which brings us beautifully back to the talk of Psyche yesterday, and then also Pat, that the social reward is crucial. I see questions coming in, and I print them for you, Rainer, in case you have YouTube not open into the chat. Mm-hmm. So there's one thing. It is fascinating. In the West, children learn the tonal perception just by listening for music in cartoons, videos, etc. What does social tolerance teaching mean? I think it's the social tolerance that you mentioned in one of your last slides.
Well, in the functionalist approaches, such as by the natural pedagogy concept of Csibra and Gergely and Michele Kline, social tolerance means that you do not stop people around you from imitating you. It's just from a commonsensical understanding of teaching, it's I think very distant from what we typically understand by teaching. It's just not stopping people from imitation. And also opportunity provision is like giving somebody a toy and let them play with the toy. So this provisioning of a toy would then also count as one aspect of teaching, which I think are the two most debatable features of these functionalist definitions of teaching.
Mm. I was thinking about these opportunities as well. There's another question by Peter Keller. Here it comes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How important is the specific social group for learning? For example, do the kids practice as play with peers without adult presence?
Well, the kids play, and some of their play takes the form of the public multi-generational performances. And the question is, would you consider that as a rehearsal? The rehearsal context is, in the West, in English at least, it has the implication of being mainly done for improving the outcome quality of the then real performance, which I think in children's play typically is not what is at stake. The play is the play, and the children do play, and I think this is, of course, I think it's without doubt that play is one of the most important contexts for learning, and in this case, in the play of Gergely or Malian children playing music and dance for themselves, it's mostly self-organized and independent from adults, other than being given toy drums. So this is an example of opportunity provisioning, but then they do their own thing. And I would not quite call this a rehearsal, but of course, perhaps they rehearse in some sense their skills, which in the course of their development, of course.
Yeah, you showed this picture of the three kids doing farming, and that looked like what Peter meant. There's another question by Psyche. So she asks, are these dance circles an everyday occurrence in the community, or are they a special occasion or some special celebration?
Yeah, it's not an everyday occasion. It's typically done on the occasion of something which needs to be celebrated, be that a wedding, a harvest, Muslim holidays. So it's part of celebration culture, or partying is in the West is a term which has this connotations of pure entertainment, but typically these celebrations in Mali are performed on the occasion of ritual or other events in the community which are considered important enough to be celebrated.
Let me see. I have maybe one final little question. You showed also this lady with a little baby on the back, and she was dancing. I mean, we know from Aaron Hennon's and Laura Trainor's work that being bounced in a specific rhythm also teaches in a way rhythm, which would be implicit teaching. So I understand you correctly that you don't rule out one or the other way of learning, but it's a combination of all of these types probably.
Yeah, I would say so. So think of the German Hoppe Hoppe Reiter or children bouncing games, which are also perhaps not. I think you could call this a statistically universal, and then being carried on a dancing mother's back, of course, is an excellent situation for implicit learning of meter, for instance, in the sense of Jessica Phillips Silver's studies.
You're right.
Yeah, of course. So this is priming meter learning in a, I would say, super efficient sense.
All right. Thank you, Rainer, for this great talk. I think we have to carry on. We say we see you around. I would say we move.
Thank you for the invitation.